Today is the 22nd of September 2009. We are at the New York State Military Museum in Saratoga Springs, New York. My name is Wayne Clark, and we are doing an interview with a Vietnam-era veteran. Sir, for the record, would you please state your full name and your date and place of birth, please?
My name is Bruce Hinman. I was born August 12, 1944 in Saratoga Springs, New York.
Did you attend school in Saratoga Springs?
I did. Graduated from high school here.
And what year did you graduate from high school?
1962.
And did you go on to college?
I did.
And where did you go to college?
Boston University.
For 4 years?
Yes.
And what did you...
Actually, I was there about 5 years total.
Okay. And what did you receive your degree in?
Bachelor's with a government major.
And once you graduated, did you go to work or did you go into the military?
No, well actually I did go in the military after I graduated, that's true. 3 years. Yes.
Did you work for 3 years before you went in? Or?
No, I went in right in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you enlist or were you drafted?
I enlisted.
And you went into the Army?
Yes.
And why did you pick the Army?
I remember talking to a recruiter at the time in the city, and he offered various options. We talked about areas of interest, and he directed me toward the something that I had never heard of before, but it was the military intelligence area. I didn't get very specific, but it sounded like a pretty interesting way to go, so I chose that. Led to some very interesting assignments.
And when did you go into the service?
October 30, 1967.
And whereabouts did you go for your basic training?
Fort Dix, New Jersey.
And how was that basic training? Was it? Were you being prepared for Vietnam?
No. Yes. I mean, your first portion of training is that was pretty much the assumption you're going to be going to Vietnam. However, because of the field I chose, and my next step, rather than going on to advanced basic training, or advanced training, I should say, following basic, I was sent to Fort Holabird for the counterintelligence agent course.
Whereabouts was that?
Fort Holabird, which is located in Dundalk, Maryland.
Okay. And how long was that school?
That went from March until July of '68.
And what did you learn?
Basically, interviewing techniques, investigative techniques, counterintelligence techniques. We were trained to go to Vietnam, but there was a change in the policy on the part of the presidential administration. They had been sending these agents overseas up to a certain point, and then when I came through there, they decided to create a corps of agents for stateside because of a lot of unrest about the Vietnam War, and they needed people to check the backgrounds of people going into sensitive positions with the Department of Defense. So they wanted a corps of stateside agents. And so most of my class were assigned to the cities in the States.
Were you offered officer candidate school at all? Or?
No. If I had stayed in after my initial enlistment, I probably would have gone for warrant officer, which is more common for people in that field.
Okay. And what was your first assignment?
My entire assignment was in Boston, Massachusetts, as a special investigator, doing personnel security investigations on applicants for positions with, involving sensitivity and high responsibility.
Did you have to go out on the street and conduct interviews, or was it?
All the work was in the field. We used vehicles, government-issued vehicles, and went out and contacted references given, and then tried to develop other leads to get a profile on applicants for positions.
Okay. Did you wear civilian clothes?
Yes.
Or? Okay.
Yes. We dressed in business attire. We also carried badge and credentials, much like the FBI investigators do. But at that time, each service had their own investigative service. The Army had theirs, and the Navy and the Air Force had their own, and now it's all consolidated.
Were you armed at all?
No.
Okay. And these interviews you conducted, they were for classified or sensitive positions. Were they civilian? They were applying for civilian jobs?
Some could be civilian contractors, but many were military.
Mm-hmm.
It would depend on the position sought. But,
Mhm.
I don't know how they classify these exactly, but I know in every case that either they were involved with a company doing work for the Department of Defense, or it would be for a military position.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever run into any problems or incidents while doing your investigations?
No, we had a special unit assigned to cases that would turn derogatory.
Mm-hmm.
We were in a field office that would have to monitor unrest in certain cities. We had different shifts of duty agent, they would call it, where you would spend the night in the office and monitor the telex.
Mm-hmm.
And then you would have to, any information that came in that was of interest would have to be forwarded on to our regional headquarters at Fort Devens, Mass.
Mm-hmm.
One night that I was on duty, information started coming in on the telex about riots in New Haven, Connecticut, and that was the type of thing at that time that we had to keep track of, as an additional duty to our investigative work. But,
how many people were on your team, or did you work with?
yeah, I tried to remember that. This is looking back 40 years ago, but I think we had maybe 20, in that particular office, which was a large, big city office, maybe 25 agents, something like that.
And what were did you have females too, or strictly males?
No, that was all male.
Mm-hmm.
I don't recall it. There might have been a few clerical people, females, in the.
Were they civilian or military?
I believe they were civilian. It's hard
Okay.
to remember that. But.
Okay. And what were your living quarters like?
Well, the Boston Army base, where this field office was located, was strictly an office building, a 5-story office building located on a pier in Boston Harbor.
Mm-hmm. So
you were responsible for finding your own housing, and most of the agents lived in apartments around the city or near the city.
Uh-huh.
So I had my own. I lived in an apartment complex where several other agents actually lived too.
So you didn't have military inspections or the typical military discipline, or
once we left Halliburton, that we left all that behind. We became more like civilians in our living style.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about your meals? Did you have to cook your own meals or eat in restaurants?
You're on your own as far as housing and meals.
Okay.
We strictly worked in an office building and administrative type work, so there was nothing even remotely related to the military, except the work that we were doing, of course, the mission that we had.
Now, what about, did you find the pay and compensation adequate to support being in the civilian world? And
at the time, it was adequate. We couldn't live in the best housing arrangements, but most of us made out okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And did you work with a partner at all, or you were strictly doing these investigations?
We were assigned to different areas of the city. I had downtown Boston for a while, and as time went on, I would be given special assignments to travel to other areas outside the city, south and north of the city, to help out other field offices to clean up their work. Sometimes they'd fall behind, and so everybody had their own area.
Mm-hmm. Did you enjoy what you were doing?
Very much, very much. Enjoyed the contacting the people that I met, and the team that we worked on in our field office was a great bunch of guys, very intelligent, a lot of fun, and it was a great experience. I was very fortunate, really, at that time to be there.
Now, the person in charge of the unit, were they like a major or a colonel?
We had two field office, I'm not sure if you call them commanders, because the first was a captain, the second was a major. Those are the two that I served under. And for the most part, they were great too, but the second one was a controversial character, but one that I remember quite well.
Now, were you ever under any sort of well, you mentioned the riots, but any type of heightened security alert or anything, especially, you were in during the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy?
When I was at Fort Halliburton, still training to be an agent, that's when we learned about the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy. And I do remember sometimes we would get passes to go home on the weekend, and I would travel by train to upstate New York from Baltimore. And at the end of one weekend, we came back on the train, and we couldn't get out of the Union Station in Baltimore because the city was under the control of the National Guard at that point. They were having rioting in the streets, and fires were being set, and it was a while before we got out of the railroad station. I remember train after train would come in letting people off, and he couldn't leave the station until we were cleared. And finally we had a special escort back to the base at Fort Halliburton to get through the area safely and to meet our curfew. We had to be home or back to the base by 2 o'clock in the morning, which is about what time we arrived that night. So that was memorable, milestone, sticks in my memory.
Okay, any other points of interest in?
It was a routine type of work. We had a lot of fun doing what we had to do. It was a service that was necessary, non-combatant, of course.
Was there anything in particular that stands out in your memory today?
I think just the special people that I met. They were all very interesting people. Many of the people in our office had been assigned to the Boston field office after serving in Vietnam. So they would come back and not always relate all their experiences, but you knew they had come from a very different type of military experience than we had, those of us that came directly from training into the field office. So we got to mix with quite a variety of military personnel and hear a lot of stories.
Have you stayed in contact with any of the people over the years?
No, I really haven't. We were scattered to the far winds. Once we were, dismissed from our service, we went on to our lives, and we were from all over the country, and no, I can't say that we have.
Okay. Is there any sort of association of military intelligence personnel or anything that
I'm not aware of it. There may be, but I'm not aware of that.
Okay.
That particular type of MWAS, I'm not aware of it, no.
Okay. Whereabouts were you discharged from?
Well, of course, Fort Devens, Mass. was the discharge point. And then I moved on to my other places where I worked and so forth.
Okay.
Eventually came back here where I lived, was born and raised in Saratoga Springs.
Okay. Did you consider making it a career?
I did. But I guess a lot of us felt that we had been very fortunate to come through the Vietnam era in the way that we did, and most of us didn't want to toy with fate. So I was interested in the warrant officer possibility, to discuss it with another warrant officer at one point, but after the 3 years, I think we were pretty much ready to call it quits and move on to our lives.
Okay. And when were you discharged?
October 29, 1970.
And once you were discharged, did you do any, I know you already had a bachelor's degree. Did you go on for a master's at all?
No, I did not.
Okay.
No, I worked for several companies for a number of years, and eventually settled down with the New York State Education Department, where I just retired from after 29 years of service there.
And what did you do with the Education Department?
Interior design and space analysis and special projects. I was very fortunate to work on a building that was on the National Historic Register, and did a lot of coordination of work related to the rehabilitation of this building and bringing it back to its original state. It was built in 1912, and we did a lot of reconstruction projects on many of the floors there.
What building was that?
This is the original state education building in downtown Albany, across from the Capitol, with the columns. It's the longest column building in the world except for the Parthenon.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's quite a very interesting place to work. I was very fortunate again to be there.
So you spent how many years in that building?
29 years there.
Yeah.
And when I retired, I took my 3 years of military buyback and went out with 32 years of
Oh,
credit
wonderful.
toward my pension. So.
Okay. How do you think your time in the service changed or affected your life?
Well, it's hard to quantify what you pick up in the service. It depends a lot on your tour, particular tour of duty. I just think it enriched my interpersonal relationships and unique experience there. It was a very troubling time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in a sense, you know, the populace became very alienated about the Vietnam War. We were in the military, and civilians often would have, or became to have a very different view of things. And I was just on kind of the edge of when things started to turn as far as the mood of the country about that.
Mm-hmm.
Lessons in life, I guess you'd say. There's just so many things about it. It's hard to pinpoint any one particular
Mm-hmm.
moment or experience or person. It was an enriching experience. And something I think everybody should go through.
Mm-hmm. Now, I didn't ask you this, but did you ever run into any problems or situations with any of the protesters or?
No, we actually had someone whose beat was the college campuses. I was in downtown Boston dealing more with the business community.
Mm-hmm.
But we had one man whose job was to spend a lot of time on the campuses where the dissidents were starting to grow, and,
Mm-hmm.
from, you know, making a lot more noise. And
Mm-hmm.
fortunately, most of that happened after we got out, but it was starting.
Now, were any of those people under investigation or?
Yeah, there was quite a case file on a number of students,
Uh-huh.
as well as civilians.
Okay. What about other agencies? Did you work with or coordinate with the FBI or?
Personally, I did not, except to if there were references that happened to be in a police department or a fire department, that I would interact with those references. But I know there were others that probably were keeping in touch with enforcement agencies, local and otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
There were different divisions in our office that handled different areas.
Okay. All right. And did you join any veterans organizations?
And I have not, no.
Okay. And so obviously you've never attended any get-togethers or reunions?
Not as far as the military.
Okay.
I have a great interest in my own family's history in the military.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Oh, okay. Do you want to talk
well, I
about
had
that?
two great-grandfathers that served in the Civil War. My great-grandfather on one side was in the 134th Regiment, New York Volunteers. He mustered in at Schoharie, New York, but they were at Gettysburg, among others. And he also was a prisoner at Andersonville Prison in Georgia for about 9 months. But he survived, came back, and his experiences were the subject of several public talks he gave. He was an attorney after he came back to Schoharie.
And what was his name?
Chauncey W. Hinman. And he was in the service on 2 different occasions. At one point he was enlisted, another point he was a lieutenant. He was in charge of what was known as the Pioneer Corps, and they were primarily involved with keeping the bridges and the railroads repaired and going.
Mm-hmm.
My other great-grandfather was Charles H. Burpee. He was in the 115th Regiment of New York State Volunteers. He went in and mustered in at Fonda, New York. And the 115th had a kind of interesting odyssey. There's 2 modern, or I should say 2 books written about these 2 regimental histories, both 134th, 115th. They're written in modern times, so they're very good. And I'm just finishing up the one about the 134th. But getting back to the 115th, I know that my great-grandfather's group, shortly after they enlisted, they were captured at Harper's Ferry.
Mm-hmm.
And they were taken prisoner and sent to Fort Douglas in Chicago. At that time, the exchange program was still very much new and active. And that's another story about what happened to them and how they always seem to be circuiting, taking a circuitous route around all the main action until they finally got back into it.
Mm-hmm.
At Olustee and Culpeper and other places. That's another story.
Okay, and you brought some memorabilia with you. Do you want to
I
hold everything up?
do have a United States Army Intelligence Command patch, which I wore on my uniform. I never got to wear the uniform during my field assignment, but I wore it through training.
Okay.
And there's also a button here that I was on my uniform from the Intelligence Service. And there's a picture of me when I was at Fort Holabird, taken there in 1968, spring of 1968, in Dundalk, Maryland. I was a sergeant.
Okay. And you attained the rank of sergeant?
E5.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And when you graduated from the intelligence school, did you graduate as a PFC or a specialist 4, or do you recall?
I believe we were, I'm trying to remember that, I believe we were Sergeant E3, I believe.
E3. Okay, E3 would be PFC.
PFC. Yeah.
Okay.
And unless it was then it was E4.
E4.
It was E4, yeah. We were
Specialist.
automatically became,
Okay.
for the special agent job. That's
Okay.
what you were.
And you recall how long it took for you to attain the rank of sergeant?
Well, let's see, we started working up there in the field office in Boston July of '68, so probably it was in early '69. It was January '69. I was promoted to the E4 rank,
Okay.
or E5, excuse me, E5.
All right. Now, is there anything else you'd like to touch on that maybe we missed? Any interesting people or incidents or anything humorous?
Well, we had, the last field office commander we had was a rather flamboyant character. He had come back from Vietnam. He really didn't have very good management skills, and wasn't particularly respected, and he was later disciplined, I understand, after I left, but he was disciplined for contributing to not only poor management of the field office, but contributing to the poor morale of the office, and therefore the decline in the production of the agents. We had a nickname for him, we called him Crash.
Okay. Anything else?
I think that's about it.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your interview.
Thank you.